The HOPS mini button is a drop-down that was added to HOPS several versions ago that was intended as a kind of welcome mat for new users entering the program and the add-on. So, you would be able to just quickly jump in, you would be able to experience everything that Sharpen has to offer, quickly add a bevel since bevel is kind of one of the stars, jump in and mirror because mirroring is so essential to us. And then you would be able to just add modifiers. Of course, in this version, I'm actually using the older version of hardops because I just want to show how the panel has become since we just really haven't dealt with it in a while. And over the course of this last release, I did want to make some improvements as far as the button goes, as far as making it more welcoming to new beginners and showing them a lot of what hardops has to offer. So we'll go ahead and minimize this version of Blender, and we're in my regular version of Blender. And we'll switch over to Box Cutter because I'm just used to always being in Box Cutter. And if we expand the button, we see that the first thing that's added is a button that is labeled the version number. So I wanted to ensure that new users coming in would always be aware of what their version number was, and to be able to click it and always be able to quickly see about information, just letting them know what version is installed and everything like that in case they need to take a screenshot and give us this for diagnostics information. So even right now, this is a placeholder that I plan to expand on in the future. An interesting Easter egg about it is we're also working on an experimental way to control click it, or I believe shift click, and it will display all the add-ons currently in use so that you can quickly share it with someone in order to show them how you're using Blender. And I think this will be helpful for diagnostics as well. But enough about the About button. So continuing on, we look at Sharpen. Sharpen is a bit of a multi-shading tool beast. You can just click it and it will perform something called Sharpen, which will have its own special video in the future. C#, which is part of Sharpen, basically an apply system that performs the calculations of Sharpen afterwards. And then Autosmooth Adjust, which is a new modal that's been added over the last couple of versions that allows you to roll the wheel and adjust your auto smoothing on the fly, which has shown to be quite useful for pretty much eradicating the whole auto smooth adjust portion of the workflow. With weighted normal, you're able to quickly get your shading absolutely right when it comes to planar shapes. Sometimes it can get a little problematic with bevels, but weighted normal is just one of those tools that modifiers that I'm just a very big fan of. And then Resharp. Resharp will remove sharpening information and recalculate it, which this can all be configured inside of preferences. So if we go down, we see that the modifiers basically haven't changed. The array system is currently defaulted to the ST3 array, which means that whenever you click it, it will put you in a mode where you begin holding control in order to begin making adjustments. And this mode is also the pioneer, in which is the first modal to have an expansive mode where you can press tab and begin, rolling your wheel and interacting with things just via key presses or, rolling your wheel, which is a step forward towards beginning to make a more accessible hops. Down here, we have our auto smooth settings, which in order to just show this in action, I will take this cube, tap into edit mode, and we'll press 2 in order to go to edge mode, select this edge, press Ctrl B, roll the wheel in order to bevel, and we will just tap back into object mode. Traditionally in Blender, when it comes to smoothing, you would go up to the top, you would hit, I swear this thing is harder to do every time, you hit set smooth, and then you go to your object data properties and you look at your normals and you choose auto smooth. And from here, you're able to begin working in what we call the auto smooth workflow. If I press Ctrl Z to undo that, and then Ctrl Z to undo that, we can now see how, our goal was to initially consolidate this workflow into being a single button solution. So I could go in, toggle auto smooth, and play with smoothing if I were to want to step through the process, or I could simply just click 30 and everything will just be set. Under the extended area of the panel, we have added support for blank material, which will allow you to quickly add a blank material to your mesh, and the material scroll, which will allow you to scroll through materials that don't yet exist in order to find something in the ether that could possibly be perfect for you. New to this version as well as an experimental feature is blank light, which will just create a randomized rig surrounding your box in order to allow you to just quickly jump through alternative lighting scenarios on the fly to see combinations of things that possibly could be. So the next part of this panel is going to be the render area, where we can actually choose our engine, Eevee, or cycles. But at this point, Eevee is the active engine. I am done with cycles. I mean, once the e-cycle stuff is in and cycles is rendering super insane, then I'm back, baby. But until then, Eevee's where it's at. Some adjustments have been made where look dev has been placed at the top, allowing you to just jump through your environments in a modal fashion. You can press S or use the arrow keys or the minus keys in order to just jump through possible render scenarios. Of course, in my situation, I have all of my favorite HDRs crammed down and repacked in order to fit inside this look dev situation in order for me to roll through them without crashing my viewport. But we also have shading improvements for your viewport. For example, EVLQ is a fairly generic shading system where it pretty much is the way that it is when you first install Blender. The shading is pretty harsh and doesn't show transitions very well. However, in my personal work, I find that EVHQ possesses settings that kind of adds cavity shading and a bit of gravity to your viewport to make it a little easier to just see what's going on. In fact, we'll just go in Box Cutter and we see that this cut kind of has a beveled look to it. In fact, if we jump through between HQ and LQ, we can see that under LQ, the settings are just basic. I believe it's just the basic conveyance of the depth of the shape and the cut and everything of what's going on in the viewport. Meanwhile, HQ adds shadows and just a little bit extra embellishment to just ensure that I'm able to best read the form whenever I'm working, and this keeps me kind of making decisions even more rapidly without the possibility of shading inconsistencies causing obscuring. So if we expand to render settings, we can see the settings that are configured for render. I always just keep it at default 64. I never found jumping this up to 256 did anything for me. And then you can see the settings as far as refraction, motion blur, bloom, and volumetric shadows. Some of these settings are things that are not connected to HQ and LQ, but do come into play as you begin working through your model. So normally these are things that I would recommend turning on by default, but in most workflows I find that they're not needed and can kind of make it a little hard on my laptop. But you know, I'm on a desktop, so it really doesn't matter at this moment. So we'll collapse render and go under bake. And if we look under bake, we can see that you have the ability to bake indirect lighting as well as cube maps. So really we intended this to be a quick way to just get in and just set up your lighting, set up your render, and just begin locking down what you want to present. And that's one way of really getting into HOPS and approaching things without having to use a whole lot of hotkeys. In fact, the export panel is a quick take on exporting by us, where we found that users were simply just trying to get their meshes out to 3D Coat and ZBrush without any further delay. They didn't want to go through the rigmarole of playing with settings. So basically, if you select your objects and you click export as OBJ or FBX from us, it will automatically set it to triangulate the mesh. It will automatically set it to apply all the modifiers, ensuring that the result that you get upon export is the one that you have in your 3D viewport. I mean, of course, geometrical issues may occur, but at least the goal of getting it into your next application for you to look at properly without there being holes of missing geometry isn't so much an issue. And it was just a lot easier to create export settings instead of explaining to people how to properly export your model. For our third tab, we have our modifier helper, or at this point it's the HOPS helper. So if we press Control tilde in the 3D view, we can bring this up. If you have an issue with tilde because you're international or using an alternative keyboard, this can be remapped inside of preferences, and then saving preferences will ensure this takes place in your 3D view. However, explaining this in context of the button, all of your options from the Control tilde helper are located in this handy dandy button. So, you know, HOPS seems complex, but really we have attempted everything in our power and as much as Blender allows to make things as accessible as possible. And while these settings can be very, very complex and daunting to the casual observer, all of this is talking about the same thing we were just talking about in the Autosmooth area of just having quick little press to just jump through your Autosmooths we look at this, we just have a few more additional prefs here because it's a bigger area. And then these settings pertain to configuring sharpen before it's actually used. And these settings pertain to booleans prior to being used. In addition to being able to configure your workflow prior to usage whenever you're using hardops, you also have options related to your object properties to get to these even faster than if you were to fight through these areas and look for your favorite properties. Unfortunately, at this time, there is a small issue with normals where normals is just not expanding, so we'll be checking into that. However, in the grand scheme of things, we have multiple areas where you can quickly get in and configure your normals, so just having one small area just be a little problematic isn't the end of the world, and we'll definitely be checking into that. However, in all honesty, having access to these things is rarely used by myself, and I find it to be a bit overkill. But it's just our attempt to present Blender in its most streamlined, optimized fashion for hard surface and general modeling usage. A lot of people tend to think that all we focus on is hard surface modeling, but really our goal is to improve the workflow in general for getting you all the way to your final result. So we go down under material, and material is something that also has been expanded on slightly for this release. There's previously a small bug where if you were to click new material, it would create a new material, but it wouldn't assign it. But before going into that, I do want to also let it be known that if you were trying to do a boolean and use a material to perform what's called a material cut, this is the area where you would set up the material that's being applied to your cut. And this is a classic feature, and I take pride in its continued existence. So I'll also show that in action. But before that, let's talk about material. So when you're using the HOPS button, whenever you click on the button, it will add a blank material. However, at this time, it will not add a blank material to the second index slot. And this is something that is being checked into and will be resolved in the next micro update. However, just being able to go in and quickly add a material on the fly. In fact, you can just shift click it to add a glass material. You can alt click it to add an emissive material where we can go in under surface and just configure those settings. So, when it comes to HOPS and the way that we present it, we try to put the best options forward to ensure that you get the best experience when it comes to coming to terms with hardops and how to integrate it into your life. So it's not so much that you have to use everything that HOPS has to offer immediately. I would just pick something of interest and see how it could benefit you, and then from there move on to the next thing. But we aim to have at least one thing that is something that you just can't live without. And for the most part, everything in HOPS is something that I can't live without. So we will go ahead and just assign a blank material. In fact, I don't want it to be an emissive. We'll change that to principal. And I will shift right click to place my 3D cursor, and we'll just add a cube. And we'll just duplicate it a couple of times and use B to box select in order to select it. And instead of using this one, which I guess we could use this one, let's control click it. And we see that it assigned a random unique material to every object. So it is a rather unique take on approaching materials. However, I must say at this time that it is a work in progress, and over time you'll see it become something rather interesting where we can quickly get in and shade models without a whole lot of difficulty. So by going back underneath this, we'll collapse surface because we don't need something so expansive in our face. We'll go under cutting material, and we'll just choose one of these random materials we've created. And so all I know is that all of these materials received a random viewport color because that is how our material generation system works. So we will just add a cube through Shift A, S, Z to scale, select them both, and we'll go under the button. And then under the first icon, we have Boolean options, which was set up and curated by AR. And we'll just go ahead and just click it. And we see that this cut has received the material cut. So when it comes to material cut, that's as easy as it takes to get into it. In fact, you can see that the color has turned light blue, indicating that this is a bowl shape. It doesn't change anything to the options that show yet, but it is showing that this takes place of our former indicator system that was happening over here on the side. So continuing on, we will go back in here, and under the helper, we will change our material to something else, and we'll select this object, and under the button and the first option, we will choose to Boolean again. So in a way, this is a pretty left mouse click centric system that we intended with this long ago with it that we never really got back around for. So continuing on with our tour of the button, we also have the Optin Panel, which is something I recommend checking out every so often, especially if there's a setting that you find may be something that is possibly controversial. We definitely aim to have these settings front and center as time goes on for users to quickly change. There's a video all about opt-ins and exactly what they do, but you can see that in my situation I have 2cam jump set up and viewport plus set render, which ensures that if I add a blank camera, it will jump to the camera, allowing me to quickly adjust it. And if I were to go and adjust my viewport, upon left mouse click, it will set that as my render settings, saving an abhorrent amount of clicks. So the opt-ins is something with its own special video that I'll be going over. Well, I already went over it. I'll just put the link in the description. The next panel is the HOPS panel. HOPS is one of our children tools, and it's a tool that means quite a bit to me. One of my favorite things in HOPS is control clicking in order to jump through various K packs and then just clicking through to just look at different inserts. In this case, I'm showing the hardops classic inserts, which is where the classic inserts of hardops went, in case you're ever wondering how to get back your inserts as far as hardops is concerned. The last but not least panel is the help panel. And this area, I believe, could probably be put a little bit more forefront for assisting users. But whenever it comes to learning hardops, we want to put links in here from time to time that assist users in getting to where they need to go. For example, at this time, Gleb has a new course out, 50 Modeling Issues from Hell, and we've taken efforts to ensure that he gets a little bit of a push because he's actually done a bit for creating content for HOPS. I'm very happy with him and 80 taking the time to actually learn our tool and talk about it without fear and criticism, because it takes a lot to spend time learning a tool, and I spend a lot of time learning everyone's tool, and I definitely take everyone's time very seriously when it comes to them learning this tool. So we definitely want to facilitate that process. I have a friend of mine who also runs a transition group on Facebook where it's intended for users coming from Max and Maya to transition over to Blender a little easier with content that's a little more curated to their sensibilities. There's also work in progress documentation that forever is perpetually out of date due to the work that is always at hand. In my opinion, it's better for us to continue moving forward than to just completely freeze up and be inundated with working on documentation. However, it is something that is my job and I should be working harder on it. So I definitely plan on making all these mini videos to assist with making content on it in the future. Whenever it comes to a release, anytime you're curious on what is new, there's something called a release log. I aim to update the release log often to let users quickly jump in and see what is new, what has changed, to just quickly get them up to speed on what is changing with the tool. When it comes to hardops, there are always videos being made to explain how things are working. And these videos are kept in curated playlists to ensure that new users can come in and quickly learn, and casual users of the tool who have been long-time users can get up to speed and quickly get in and play with what's new and just have fun, who are here for the kind of amusement park aspect of things. Of course, another link to our manual. And then there's a classic video playlist, which is a playlist of videos from older versions of hardops in case people are wanting to see kind of how hardops used to be in comparison to how things have gotten now. The user gallery is a curated gallery of awesome users and their epic work that I do my best to update frequently, but I just get so much awesome work thrown in my face from just users of every direction that sometimes it's hard to keep updated. But I consider it the Hall of Fame, the top row of hardops users, in my opinion. And everyone there holds a special place in my heart, and I look forward to adding more people to that list. If you're using hardops and you have no idea of what to do, the challenge board is right for you. By going under the challenge board, it's a Pinterest board of basically images that I've collected online that will challenge you in your modeling and understanding of HOPS to just kind of give you some ideas. There's also a Facebook group and a Discord channel when it comes to connecting with other users and learning how to use the tool. Learning the tool alone can seem like a daunting task, but by making friends and connections, it can definitely become a lot easier. And then, of course, a guide to how to use the latest box cutter. So that wraps up basically how the button works in HardOps. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.